Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Slide decks from the presenters are going to be available below. Thanks for watching.
We're really excited to have you all here today. Those in person or those that are out remotely. Got some good stuff to talk about today. Before we get started, I want to ask a couple questions to the audience just to get a sense of what your familiarity are with the Inflation Reduction Act. Can you raise your hand if you believe you are an expert in the Inflation Reduction Act? All right, we got one. I need to talk with you. All right, so we'll have another question here. People know at least a component of the Inflation Reduction Act that you've applied in your project? Okay, we've got a couple more hands. 10%. Who's heard the Inflation Reduction Act and the Inflation Reduction Act either in the news or elsewhere, at least the words Inflation Reduction Act? Okay. So, one session, we're hoping to have the perspective about what the Inflation Act is, some components of the Inflation Reduction Act to help you and your projects press forward and be more efficient in those things. Got a panel of experts. It's construction and energy efficiency. It's about components of the Inflation Reduction Act to move your projects forward. So here's our lineup of panelists. Get it? Applause for the AV guy. So we're going to be covering these key insights, practical strategies, and policies and practices. And I'll be doing a quick introduction and we're moving along to the content of today. So to get started here, that Inflation Reduction Act has been called one of the largest investments in the United States, over $4 billion for climate solutions and environmental impacts and justice. There's a number of things that it has been focused on, and a large percentage of that is the energy supply and business tax credits in terms of those two types of modems of application. There's a lot of other things as well. What is this big kind of impact? We're talking about kind of transitioning off of fossil fuels. So we have this kind of interim period where we'll have fossil fuels will be transitioning, like perhaps natural gases, but eventually we'll be going to renewables. We need to get there sooner than later. There are a number of different avenues, incentives, tax credits, things that are impacting labor standards and other aspects. We're going to be focusing on a specific aspect of that for affordable housing and components of that. We couldn't cover all of the things with the Inflation Reduction today. It would take a lot more topics and a lot more specialists to discuss those insights. So in terms of why it matters, we have this thing about carbon emissions and hitting, these numbers that you've heard that if we hit a number, it's going to be catastrophic for human society and life around. And we were projecting based on policies in the past, we weren't going to get there. So this Inflation Reduction Act allows us to get closer to those initiatives that we need to get to as a society, as humanity. And the US's contributions to this is pretty sizable. So we, in terms of our aspects of impact on the right side of this slide, is a larger share of it overall compared to other countries around the world. So the Inflation Reduction Act allows us to get there faster so that we're making our fair share of contributions to that. Because, objects look a little larger in that mirror, or they look smaller. So we've got this thing that's right above us, this footprint that's right up behind us that we're trying to kind of march away from and be able to drive towards a better outcome for the people we serve, people that are needing to have those things addressed sooner than later and can't do that on their own. So there's the direct trajectory of it. We've been doing a pretty good job before the Inflation Reduction Act, but we weren't going fast enough. So it really accelerates those things in a number of areas. And I have slides, or I should say handouts, both in electronic and also in print form, with some of this material that you'll be able to access after our conversation today. Also, a lot of the content we cover today is going to be very dense in nature. So I'm providing that there's going to be an electronic form of it that you could be able to use as a resource for your projects in the future. There's a lot of different avenues that you can have in terms of debt, equity, incentives, tax credits. You all know those in the capital stacks of things. And we're going to be focusing on a specific component of those today. And these are different programs that those things can be implemented in. And we're going to be focusing on a couple of these today as well. We have resources on the other ones, but we want to make certain that you have all of this information available at your hands to be able to make informed decisions so that you can make better decisions for the projects that you're working on and leverage those resources for a better tomorrow. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to the first panelist, John Warner, financial consultant, and let's go forward.
Thank you, Eric. And hi, everybody. Good morning. Excited to be here for the first session of our day. So I'm going to kick this off. A little bit of a bio first. So I've served, I've served for a couple of decades in municipal housing finance agencies, but for the last dozen plus years, I've been working as an independent financial and development consultant, weaving together diverse funding sources to craft financially sustainable and impactful development projects, what I call tapestry financing. And with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, I've seen a real uptick in work on projects using energy efficiency and renewable energy tax credits. And recently, for the Inflation Reduction Act changes to the investment tax credit, it's allowed for monetization through what we'll discuss called elective pay, as well as the use of ITC's stackable bonus credits and the volume capped and competitively allocated bonus credits for low-income communities. So I'm excited to participate in this panel today with my esteemed panelists and moderator to discuss how the IRA provisions can impact affordable housing. So I'm going to start off our panel presentation by providing a high-level overview of the Section 45L energy efficiency credits, benefits, and credit amounts. And that'll be followed by a look at the Section 48 investment tax credit and its stackable bonus credits and the new elective pay monetization mechanism for non-taxable entities. And a little disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer or an accountant. I'm not here to provide either legal or accounting advice. So please do consult your lawyers and accountants early in the development process to figure out how to use these resources to the benefit of the developments that you're working on. So let's see. Yay. Super. Okay, so starting off with 45L, the new energy efficiency home credit. The Inflation Reduction Act expanded and extended the 45L for 10 years until the end of 2031. This extension has been really beneficial because it provides a longer runway for this incentive that previously was renewed on short-term, often retroactive bases. So it now makes it more predictable, more accessible. You can count on it. So I think that's a tremendous innovation from the IRA. Also, it no longer reduces eligible basis for LIHTC deals. So that's a critical innovation and increases the value of the credit significantly. And now also all buildings are eligible, residential properties, whether they're single or multifamily, and regardless of the number of stories in the building. There were previously constraints in both those regards. So the new standards for energy efficiency have been implemented. The DOE Zero Energy Ready Home or DOZER standard and the Energy Star Multifamily New Construction Standard are applicable now. And there are two tiers in the program, each with different standards and different levels of benefits provided. So Tier 1 requires that you meet the Energy Star standard. And depending upon whether or not you're meeting prevailing wage requirements, the credit has a different value. So it's $500 per unit without prevailing wage and $2,500 per unit with prevailing wage. If you go for Tier 2, which requires you to meet not only the Energy Star, but also the DOZER standards, then it ups the value of the credit to $1,000 per unit without prevailing wage and $5,000 per unit with prevailing wage. To access the credit, you have to get an energy efficiency report, which requires an evaluator to assess your building. We'll hear more about that a little bit later here. But the cost of that evaluation is between $300 and $900 per unit. So it offsets a substantial amount of the value of the credit at the lower tiers or exceeds it. And also importantly, the cost of the report is also includable in an eligible basis. So you can pay for 40+% of the cost of that report with tax credit, low-income housing tax credit equity. So I'm going to stop there so as not to steal the thunder of folks downstream from me with regard to the 45L and move on to the investment tax credit program. So the investment tax credit, or ITC, has historically been known as Section 48, and starting in 2025, there'll be a tech-neutral 48C credit. So the IRA, similarly to the 45L, extended. It also expands and makes the program better integrate with low-income housing tax credits. It's a 30% credit that's been extended for 10 years, at least until 2032, or until emissions from electrical generation in the United States are reduced to 25% of the 2022 levels. So the lifespan of this credit could extend extensively beyond 2032, depending upon the pace at which we curtail emissions from electricity generation. And also, like the 45L, this credit is no longer reduces eligible basis. So that's a big benefit for low-income housing tax credit finance projects. So there are two pathways for monetizing the ITC. You can use the traditional tax equity partnership approach. Use case for that would be it's typically done in conjunction with low-income housing tax credit financing of new construction or acquisition rehab. And in using a tax equity partnership, you're able to monetize both the tax credits and the depreciation, which is an important part of the overall benefit package to an investor and for which they're willing to pay. The alternative approach is to use the new elective pay, also known as the direct pay approach for monetization that's available for non-taxable entities like nonprofits, governments, rural electrical cooperatives. So use case for this is adding solar to an existing project. It's much simpler. Elective pay, just through a tax return, refunds the value of the credit at par. There's no discounting on the credit, but you're only able to monetize the tax credits and not the tax benefits associated with depreciation. So a big part of the benefit isn't monetizable under the elective pay scheme. So in terms of sizing the credits, the Inflation Reduction Act restored the value of the ITC credit to what it had previously been at 30%. It's been stepping down over a series of years, but it's been pushed back up to 30%. But there's an if associated with that. It's if your solar facility is less than a megawatt AC, or if the project meets prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. If you don't do that, then the value of the credit is reduced to 6%. So it's a substantial haircut in the value of the credit. The in affordable housing, it's really would be an extraordinary circumstance when you'd see a solar facility that was larger than 1 megawatt AC. So for all intents and purposes, for low income housing tax credit deals, the base credit should be worth 30% of eligible basis. So in addition to the base credit of 30%, there are stackable bonus credits that in theory could increase the value of the credit up to 70% of eligible basis, but in practice rarely exceeds 40 to 50% of eligible basis. So I'm going to walk through what those stackable bonus credits are quickly. First is a 10% bonus for domestic content, which would necessitate that 100% of the steel and iron in your renewable energy project be domestic, and starting now 40%, rising by 2028 to 55% of the manufactured goods in your project would also have to be domestically produced. They've created some safe harbor definitions to make this compliance easier. Solar modules, for example, if they're manufactured in the US using cells that are also produced in the US, then you're automatically deemed to qualify for at least 36% domestic content. So just the solar cells alone could get you much of the way to meeting the current 40% standard for manufactured goods. And then the next bonus is a 10% energy community bonus. So that's applicable for projects that are located in brownfield areas or in areas that have high fossil fuel employment and high unemployment rates, or in areas where a coal mine was closed after 1999, or a coal-fired power plant was retired after 2009. And then lastly, there are 4 categories for low-end community bonuses, which are competitively allocated by the U.S. Department of Energy and are capped annually at an aggregate of 1.8 gigawatts of power. I'm still there. So the category 1, 700 megawatts, is for projects that are located in low-income communities as defined by the new market tax credit eligible census tracts. Category 2, which is 200 megawatts, projects are located in Indian land as defined by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Category 3 is another 200 megawatts, which is qualified low-income residential building projects. That's a 20% credit there. That's projects that are financed with LIHTC or other federal housing programs that are identified in the Violence Against Women Act, interestingly enough. And then category 4, another 700 megawatts for qualified low-income economic benefit projects. That's a 20% credit. And that's where greater than or equal to 50% of the financial benefit of electricity produced by the project it benefits households that are either below 200% of poverty or below 80% of area median income. Within the category 3 and 4 that I just mentioned, there are set-asides for projects that meet additional ownership or geographic criteria. I don't think I have time to get into that today. But as far as investors are concerned, they'll typically underwrite based on the 30% credit and any by right bonuses. And then they'll give you the benefit of any competitively awarded credits on an adjuster basis if you earn those out. So on a 4% LIHTC deal that's in the DDA or difficult to develop area or a qualified census tract, if you qualified for the additional 20% adder, then you could be generating tax credit equity that would be in excess of 100% of the ITC property basis. And then if you're getting 85 cents on the dollar for those credits, you could pay for about 87% of the cost of the solar facility. So you would, in this example where you have a $400,000 solar project, you'd only have a residual need to find funding for a little bit more than $50,000 of the project. So let's see, going to move along here. So the ITC, especially when it's used in conjunction with a 45L credit, can cover most, if not all, of the cost of including solar in a LIHTC project. And doing so can help reduce your utility costs and potentially increase your borrowing capability. Provides a way to reduce financing gaps and generally improve the operating efficiency of your project. So ITC's reduced a couple of details. The ITC reduces depreciable basis generally for half of the credits you receive. So if you got a 30% credit, then your basis, depreciable basis on the facility would be reduced by 15%. So 85% of the ITC property would be depreciable. And then if tax exempt debt is used in financing a qualified property, then the investment credit is reduced by the fraction of the qualified facility that's funded with the tax exempt bond proceeds up to a maximum of a 15% reduction. So you just typically, in this instance, you're just following the traditional guidance you'd be using with regard to using tax exempt bond financing. So I think that I probably should wrap up my presentation to give time for other folks to talk about, but we can talk about elective pay a little bit later when we're having the audience participation section.
Oh, is it okay if I stand for this? Just to get started from the fidget, I'll trade you. Cool. All right. Is that about the right distance? Excellent. Hi, I'm John Stevenson with Earth Advantage. I do field verification for LEED, Earth Advantage, Standard, and Energy Star. I have been working on Energy Star stuff for about a year since it kicked in October, November of last year. I do a decent amount of the design review as well to make sure the projects are on track. So I kind of have three goals today. High level, figure out what the major, or explain what the major choices, different pathways, and the differences between the two different tiers of the 45L credit are, and we'll discuss some of the tools that we've developed to help people through that maze. It is a pretty complicated program. And so just some kind of tripwires, hard requirements that projects have had difficulties with. So yeah, a handful of those. Some projects early tax credit tried to back into it with existing designs. There wasn't a ton of success with that. It is definitely best to be involved with a verifier and make sure that it's aligned throughout design, construction, all the way to close out. So it needs to be involved. Obviously, a construction and design team will be the rating companies scenario. We have an energy modeler who works for us. So we're closely with a national organization that provides oversight, which is very helpful when it comes to interpretations of the complex national program. I would like to point out, if you've been through a LEED project or an Earth Advantage project, there are slightly more specific requirements for HVAC, both the heat, cooling, and conditioning that flows foundation. So it's important to just have that throughout the project. Yep. So, Energy Star is the difference between paths and tracks. So paths are requirements, and there are three choices there. One is prescriptive, which is just what it sounds like. There's certain insulation values, certain local values, certain flows required. The other end of the spectrum, the actual path, the entire building gets modeled. I think a good choice when there's a very efficient component to the building, so that you actually capture that benefit. Trade-offs available in that scenario. And path is modeled with the same software for a PERS or a single-family Energy Star. Spaces in the UI. It's prescriptive. It's typically guide components. It's an actually can benefit for some projects. And so add a track. There's two choices for HVAC conditioning. Typically, a list of certified registered agents. Do conditioning in the common space. So do conditioning on a sampling the dwelling unit equipment. So tracking, grading of residential units. Typically, pursue that path. So some kind of complicated charts and here, see just for a reference later, give you a sense of your choices. Let's see. Now here's the third one down, and see if I have the laser. Do I have the laser? Which side is it? It's the red bit. Ah, perfect. So 15% tiers is what we're looking for. 2021 code. So briefly mention, I'm going to talk about there is an Oregon Washington version, but it will be viable by the end of this year. So I imagine to too many projects in this side. What condition is required for a heating equipment? A common area. A lot of the answers. And some of those are actually similar part requirements. So is energy struggle tier 2 is so here is it's pretty much just energy star. It's energy and air quality and some durability water management items. So it is kind of the same. So electrification. So you can see it's is the EP, which is a prerequisite for tier 2. So let's see. Okay. This is going to be this TV show. I don't really how he exactly the footnotes of these checklists. You don't have to, hopefully. Just in Minor Colin Robinson is he has an emerging empire where he just runs trouble and to minutia and his souls are completed. So yeah, it's we all know Colin. We all know there's a much more. I'm going to be Colin. So awesome. All right. Let's see. So the most important is to get projects through to get them through the leads. There's no slides here. I'm design, build, and close out. During the design phase, we touch base with project space, two major so ones in terms of feasibility. We look at and efficiencies. Make sure take a closer look. This is specific about how it's documented. So going to be similar. Let's see. So since we learned because is a program. Goals of the platinum, you pass or you do not. So those requirements are pretty specific and specifically, I think build teams are used to looking at. Some examples of those are slab edges. If that is 10 feet slab edge that should be insulated and is not under a door, under a window, that project is out. If there is a trash room where there needs to be a break between the trash room and the rest of the building, and there's an affordable break there, the project is out. So you really do need to look pretty closely throughout the process. Let's see here. Because of the complexity and many footnotes, always ask for clarifications. And I think we've got an example of that from the build side later with Energy Star lighting. For simplicity's sake in communication, sometimes we say things briefly, but there's often an alternative or more detail available. For trade-offs, sometimes with envelope or equipment that is available, sometimes absolutely not. It is a hard requirement. We've asked the national, they're like, nope, there's no flexibility there. And then lastly, as you're looking through the project, the requirements for dwelling units and common areas can be different, so don't assume that they are the same. Here's another handful of just the small items, our values for access hatches, gaskets and whatnot. And then I haven't spent much time on Dozer. It is focused more on the dwelling units. Here are some broad components of things that are part of that. And then lastly, Indoor Air Plus. The nice thing about Indoor Air Plus is that it was directly built on top of Energy Star. So for many categories or items in Indoor Air Plus, it just says if you've already satisfied Energy Star multifamily, you're good to go to the next item. And then we have a couple slides about gut rehab and also time frame applicability, if anybody has questions about that. That's my piece. Cool.
Perfect. Okay, and I am next, as it turns out. So I am Carly Harrison, Director of Real Estate for Albina Vision Trust, and my background is in housing development, affordable housing, and conventional. And just to tell you a little bit more about Albina Vision Trust, for those not in the Portland area, we're a community-driven nonprofit focused on the restorative redevelopment of the 94 acres of Lower Albina, which is in the Rose Quarter area. That area has a historical significance as it was the home of to 4 out of every 5 Black families in Portland before they were displaced by urban renewal. So we are reclaiming land, rebuilding the community, and preserving legacies and culture in the heart of the city. And a lot of that focus is going to be on housing, especially in our earlier phases. So where my part is in this presentation is I get to kind of build on the expertise from Mr. Warner here, who actually has taught me something even in the preparation of this. As it turns out, when we raised our hands about who knows a lot about 45Ls, I don't think there's a lot of people that really do yet, because we're all figuring it out as we go. So it's helped to get smart people in the room to help you who have gone just a little bit before, because we are still kind of figuring this out as we go at times. So I'll stay a little more high level and we'll focus on a decision tree with an example project. But before I do, I'd love to get a sense for who's who in the room in terms of the makeup of your professions. I see some developers and some architects, but let's do a raise of hand. Who is in the development/owner side of things? Okay, awesome. And then who is on the architect design side and maybe energy side too? Okay, awesome. And then the general contracting side, the build side. Perfect. And then funders with the money. Okay. And then maybe like property management or asset management? No, maybe not. Anyone I missed in terms of a contingent? What contingent do you belong to? Okay. Awesome. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. So what I'm going to talk about is just kind of the big picture overview of energy efficiency and renewable energy and how important they are and how the time is now to do them if we're not already doing them, and many of us are. I'll touch on the 45L credit with a real life example, looking at the 2 tiers and kind of the decision tree about them. And then talk a little bit about the investment tax credits and stacking credits, and give some kind of my take on what good next steps are for folks. What I'm going to do is use Albina 1 as a case study. And this is Albina Vision Trust's, or AVT's, first brick and mortar project. We're halfway through construction. We'll wrap up next June. It's 94 units of affordable housing, and it was financed by 4% low-income housing tax credits and tax-exempt bonds, Metro funding, like many projects that many of you are working on both the development side and the design side. That piece is relevant because, as you've seen from what Mr. Warner has shared, there's a lot of nuance to how these function with tax credits in a really positive way, but then also knowing where that 15% deduction needs to be encountered in the decision tree. One thing that I'll just mention as an aside for this project is it is in Portland, and so we did have the benefit, and I would say luxury, of applying for and receiving PSEF funds early on in the project, right? And if you have an opportunity for that, it changes the decision matrix completely, right? So that's a big win, and not most jurisdictions, no jurisdiction really has that outside of Portland. So I'll approach this as if we didn't get those funds, so that we can all think about it in a more equal way. The largest upgrades that we were making in that application that I think really set our sail in the right direction was adding mini splits to each unit. Really the most energy efficient heating and cooling you can do. Heat pump water heaters for the buildings, electric. So we went full electric in the building, no gas. And then added exterior rigid insulation and solar PV. And a lot of those are kind of, you do them in most projects, but for us at the time in the matrix, it was a decision and a cost to add them. So when we think about, I'm going to tell you a couple numbers, but I'm going to keep them fairly high level, and I'm going to keep them at a per unit basis so that you guys, if you want to take notes, you can kind of think about them this way. Because I think for both the design side and the build side and the developer side, getting the big picture is the first step. So for those improvements, the total cost was about $28K per unit. They're larger units, and we also had BOLI prevailing wage. But that's a pretty decent size premium. Because they were 4% LIHTC, the equity helped buy down, 44% of that, which is nearly $13,000 a unit. The solar investment tax credits at just the 30%, but after deducting the 15% for tax exempt debt and and about 85 cents on the dollar LIHTC equity price, it's about $60K. And then or about $700 a unit, I think. And then the energy savings, if you can monetize it for your and take on a bit more loan to cover it. If you weren't conservative at all and just 100% took the full value of the loan, that would be another 6.2K per unit. I think you can be conservative and make some decisions about that. But if you did all that, your gap is really 9,000 a unit for making those big upgrades without having any grant funding. And so just like that's still a lot of money, and that's for the overall project it was about 860,000. But big picture, it's a lot, and it's also not a lot. It's definitely like looking in the right direction for different improvements you can make to your building that have a big payoff. So with that 860,000 or 9K a unit in gap, really I think there's a couple different ways to look at how you fill it. And one is if you're already doing so many different things, and you're ready. If you haven't already decided to do Energy Star certification to do Tier 1, you can go that path. And I think that's a really good baseline to do. And you probably should do it nowadays, now with the 45L credits as they are, which would bring your gap down another nearly $2,000 a unit. And at Tier 2, it would bring it down to only $5,000 a unit. So that's pretty good. You can usually fill the gap with a combination of some ORMEP or MEP funds. You have to be careful about how you layer those on with the other funds that are covering sustainability upgrades. But it really leaves a pretty good gap. So my vote in that case is, do as much as you can, and obviously keep your options open as you're lining your capital stack, because they do have some complexities. And so for Albina 1 in our decision tree, I think it was pretty easy. We were going to just do the Tier 1 and keep the door open for Tier 2 for the 45Ls as we figured it out. I think the collective we were figuring it out as it was happening, because there's a lot of information that wasn't yet published. All of you going forward will have the benefit of learning from all the things we figured out the harder way. Not just we, but the collective we in the universe here in the States. But I would say just big picture, with a prevailing wage question, if you have prevailing wages, that also includes federal Davis-Bacon, so not just commercial BOLI. So that means you are going to automatically qualify for the 2.5K unit or up to the 5K if you're doing Tier 2. And that makes a big difference. And so any project with any federal funding at all that's doing federal Davis-Bacon also qualifies. And that's because of a definition per the Department of Energy. So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but if the numbers work, do it. And then lastly, make sure I'm going to the right one. Okay, so then the other piece is investment tax credits and solar. I think for those of you, I've participated on a panel before where I've talked a lot about these kinds of upgrades and the investment tax credits. And so if you have a roof, put solar on it. In nowadays, and it's a 4% LIHTC project. It is, you will, how do I say this without giving away all of the secrets to the universe? You don't lose money by putting a solar panel on your roof, and you don't lose net of kind of everything. You can't lose money by putting a solar panel on your roof, as long as you make the decision at the right time with a 4% LIHTC project. That is. So just do it always. And for the credit adjustments, just to give you kind of a sense for the developers in the room, with that 50% reduction at the 30% base credit, that's worth about 25.5 cents, or yeah, 25.5%. And then you'll have another 15% off of that for the tax credit equity. So it yields about 21.6. The 20% bonus is very, very, very accessible right now. There's an annual cap of 1.8, I think, gigawatts, something like that, that we haven't even tapped in. We haven't even used up as of 2023. And so I think I'm going to put it on my list to apply for those credits. And I encourage everyone in our state to also do so that we get more of the credits in wonderful Oregon. It's pretty straightforward application on the Department of Energy. And for anyone that is looking into putting the investment tax credits on their property, the paperwork is quite a bit different, and there's always a lot of gotcha moments when you're dealing with tax credit stuff. So I would encourage you to read the form, like I think it's IRS form 3038 or something like that, where you're actually filling out the 15-page IRS form for just tax credits. And it will walk you through kind of where you need to make sure you don't get the gotchas, or at least you understand them beforehand. So big picture takeaways, work with partners, get consultation where you are trying to make a decision and maybe you don't know everything quite yet because a lot of this stuff is being figured out as we go. More guidance gets published. I think big picture, start early if you can, if you're going to do it, so that you have the benefit of working with all the collaborators on the design team and construction team early, so that you don't have challenges like we've had we kind of applied some of them a little bit later. That will help a lot. And then I would just say there's a lot of vagueness in some of the requirements for the Energy Star and a lot of room for interpretation. And that can be a little challenging. So hopefully as years progress, it gets a little bit easier for everyone. But that's where good communication and really asking those questions, as Eric mentioned, of the providers to get their guidance is helpful. And I'm going to pass it on to Brian now.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Carly. So my name's Brian Lehman, project manager with Walsh Construction. We've gone through a lot of slides so far, a lot of details. I'm gonna simplify it down, show some examples, some pictures, probably talk quickly, get you out of here. That's the goal. So why am I here today? I'm currently closing out a project that had 45L incentives. That's Francis and Claire in Southeast Portland, a 4-story affordable housing building. Also working on Julia West House, which is off West Burnside, a 12-story mass timber project. And then Carter Commons will be coming up in February, which has 45L requirements as well. That will break ground in February. So somehow I've been lucky enough to get thrown into this program, and it's every project I touch is somewhat involved in it, which is funny because when I was preparing for the presentation, I asked around a bunch of people, and it seemed like there were a lot of projects that aren't implementing 45L or dozer. So I think that's why this is important. And like Carly said, if the dollars work, do it. So hopefully after this entire presentation, people will understand better if it's a real possibility or not. 2 items Carly mentioned, starting early and collaborative approach. I think those are really the 2 key assets that I've seen. And I'll touch on exactly why I say that. But the reason we're here to this conference is about collaboration. It's some people get up in front and speak, but really what I would like is to hear what other people have experienced, maybe around a beer afterwards, maybe Bloody Mary. It's pretty early, but we'll go check it out. And the greatest impact we can really have as a contractor is being involved early. That's where we can look at the cost, try to affect design, make sure things are implemented in a constructible fashion. If we're not on early, it's always chasing the ball. So I think that's very important in that collaboration. So I'll go through a few quick items, really just based on cost and items we ran into, particularly focusing on Francis and Claire. So I'll go to the next slide here. So as I mentioned, timing is everything. So on Francis and Claire, the idea to implement 45L came up about, it was somewhere around 6 months into the project. So we had framed through the 4th floor. Uh, MEP had already started, so that kind of makes your decision tree a lot smaller. There are things that you can't do at that point. So quickly we realized the dozer approach wasn't going to work. We would have had to return a bunch of mechanical equipment. And beyond the cost effect of that, that kind of takes away from the sustainability approach too. If you're just returning equipment, doesn't seem like it's meeting the benefit. So we pivoted to the 45L. And what was interesting was it was mentioned earlier. So Portland Clean Energy Fund, the PSEF funding, Earth Advantage already being on the project, that really helped us meet a lot of the requirements that were in the 45L program. So what I find interesting is the details that we'll share up here. They're really fairly minor items, is what we came to find, that differ for this project. And I think to Carly's point earlier too, it depends on what other credits you're getting. So that's part of that whole layout and the reason you look at it early. You can't just look at 45L by itself. You have to look at the other programs that feed into it. So this one is one that we found interesting after starting. So it shows the insulation going 2 feet below grade. There's some exceptions for thicker insulation in that table there, so it doesn't have to go quite as far down. But on Francis and Claire, we had stem walls that came up above grade and then dropped down to the footings. So that caused a unique detail. On most elevations, that fairly simple detail there worked, which was the MPP panel was already furred out from the wall. So it was able to just continue down and cover that insulation. I say just, there's obviously a flashing in there to help get the water out, but a pretty easy profile to follow. What got more complicated for us was on the main frontage of the building, facing the west side. We had storefront along that whole area, and the storefront was flushed out with the face of the stem wall. And we obviously, this is the main face of the building, so it needs to look really nice. So we were trying to figure out a way, with the help of the architect, to make this look really nice in the detail. And what we ended up doing was, you can see there, we just stepped out that MPP panel from the wall. And we were a little concerned about this approach at points, so we actually mocked it up and made sure that it truly was going to look good. And then ended up just dropping it down the face there. We did have to also excavate back to get the below grade insulation in. So just another reason that timing's everything. This was the main cost difference in the project to transition to 45L. Is about $21,000, so well worth the credit. So yeah, I think just based on the other workflows that we had, it worked out on this project pretty well. And then this is the inside of, I mean, it's, I'll mention it in the next slide too, but it's the unique details that will get you. This, as we infill sites, we get much smaller land areas to build on. Things are very tight. I've experienced that with a number of projects lately. This one actually shared the exterior structural wall with a stormwater planner. So probably not a great place to run insulation. So it came to the inside of the wall here. And so that's what this is showing, is that we actually had to fur out into the unit. So again, these design decisions made early, not a big deal, but you're actually taking away some unit space when you do that. Which for these units, these were first floor units, very high ceilings, spacious, so it worked out, but definitely could cause problems later in the game if you're not prepared for it. And then, yeah, I mentioned unique design features. So this, we've been seeing this a bit more lately, but hardy panel broken up by some deep reveal flashings. So you can see there's actually a downspout running down one of the reveals there, which is kind of unique, going back into the building. That's fun. But you can also look up and just see how deep that inset is. So in some areas, it actually went back into the framing. So it was reducing the amount of insulation we could get in those areas, which met code, but not necessarily 45L. So we just had to look ahead and make sure that we had denser insulation in those areas. So what I've found is that it's more of the unique areas that can get you than the base design. We're really starting, I would like to think we are, and I really think we are designing more sustainably naturally. So it's looking out for those areas that are unique to each project. And then moving targets. This is always fun, and why it really takes a team to follow this. So it was mentioned earlier, the Energy Star ratings. So on the project I'm in pre-con on right now, we were trying to find the most not only energy efficient but cost-effective lights to use. And what we were finding is we're struggling to find Energy Star rated lighting that was newer. And so upon doing further research, we found that they're actually sunsetting the Energy Star program for fixtures and bulbs, which is the reason that those aren't being seen as much. So that's actually taken from, that excerpt's taken from an EPA memorandum that was sent out about this, and it essentially says that they're sunsetting it at the end of this year, which is pretty quick. So we started looking into the 45L program specifically says Energy Star. It doesn't say anything else. So Eric did some research and found that we could also use ANSI and ResNet 301 Tier 2 fixtures, and the ResNet fixtures we are able to get. So it's just understanding, I think it was noted before, footnotes. It's you wish those were up at the top, clearly directing you. But the reality is we were talking earlier, I think some legal person wrote this, so it's, you know, they like to make you dig. So, yeah, let's see here. So then the pre-con decisions, again, just really hitting on the early approach. I mentioned not being able to do the dozer program on Francis and Claire. One of the reasons for that was a design decisions that were made early on, that the HVAC system wouldn't have met the requirements. As I mentioned, we would have had to actually return items. And so that would have been very costly at that point. But had we approached this decision earlier, it very well, we could have done that cost analysis to see if those, if the extra credit was worth the effort there. And just to let you know, on Julia West, that program is dozer, going with the dozer certifications. That team started the process very early, so it's interesting to look at that project as well, because you almost don't even notice that there's a dozer program there, because it's just Holst implemented it throughout the design, so it's really intertwined in the documents. So easy for us as a contractor to wrap our minds around. And then prevailing wage was mentioned before. Obviously, for the larger incentive, the incentive probably most people in here would go after, it's going to kick off prevailing wage. So we know a lot of the projects we do have prevailing wage anyway, Davis-Bacon, Boley, but not all of them do. Even affordable housing projects sometimes do not have prevailing wage. So obviously that's a huge piece of the puzzle, is doing that cost calculation early if you don't already have prevailing wage, because that could definitely tip the scales. May still be worth doing, but just something people need to be aware of. I think I'll pass it to Eric with that.
So we had planned to have some prepared questions here, but before we go there, or if we go there, are there questions that you have of us? We can kind of keep it more kind of interactive with the audience, so we have enough time for those questions. So if you could just do a raise of your hand if you have any questions for any one of the panelists here. We got one, at least one. Any others? Okay. Well, I'd be happy to give you the mic to ask your question, and then maybe that will spawn on some other questions, and if not, we have some prepared questions for the panelists as well.
Good morning, Teresa Diebel. Thanks for the panel. And I guess I'm curious about the timing of some of the incentives here, and how much you need to think about bridge financing to be then later reimbursed by this. Like, how are you thinking through that as you're planning these projects?
Our closing and getting closer to our closing, we did need to fill it with some credits. We had already planned to do the 45L credits, but good thing we did because, you know, when you're closing and your interest rates are moving, you never know what's going to happen in the last couple weeks for where your loan ends up landing. So I think it really is, yeah, there's different ways to make that decision. If you don't need it, then it's nice to have it be a bonus. And then just make sure if it is a LIHTC project that it's going to be easier and cheaper for you to wrap into your limited partnership agreement the recognition of both the 45Ls and the investment tax credits, because it's usually very plug and play. It's just it's an amendment later that's legal costs that it's better to avoid. And same with the investment tax credits. I think previously, before the ITC went back up to 30%, and it wasn't always a slam dunk in terms of whether or not you always wanted to put solar on your project. I think now that it certainly is, I go in with solar as designed and the basis of design, and so I make that decision really early because of the programs available right now. Yeah.
Sure. Got another question?
Thanks. Hi, Eric. Hi, Carly. Carly, this is a question for you. My name is Trisha Paul. I'm with Energy Trust of Oregon. So on the Albina 1, you have ductless mini splits on the rooftop, and you have solar. Can you talk a little bit about how those conflict or how they work together and what your decision was in, you know, how much roof space you have?
Condenser units, I think, on the ground floor as well. We have a little courtyard, so it's mixed between the rooftop and then this courtyard. And we had the benefit of having a decent amount of space on the building. It's on the site. It's a 7-story building, so it wasn't like one of the sites that Brian's talking about. But it definitely, I mean, big trade-off, and you always want to maximize as much roof area. But at the end of the day, you do have to find a place to put them. So someday, if we can create a place to put those, I don't know, we make things better.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay. Well, I've got a couple of prepared questions also. So the question goes to Brian. What advice would you give project teams pursuing tax credits that have design construction requirements to improve their likelihood of achievement? I have a follow-up question for you, Brian. So the next question I have for you is, are apprenticeship requirements or workforce labor standards mandated under 45L? And if not, what are the key compliance requirements for general contractors?
It was not super clear to us if the apprenticeship requirements did apply. So we took a look deeper into the documents, looked back into other reference documents, and found that they did not apply. Still didn't quite trust the answer because you need to be 100% sure when you're in pre-construction. So the owner on that project actually hired an attorney to take a look at the documentation that was provided and came to the same determination that apprenticeship would not be required. There is a footnote somewhere in there that does mention 45L as an exception. So the full program's listed out, and apprenticeship requirements applies to some of it. but not other parts. So I would definitely say though, as we mentioned, I think it was mentioned that the program's updating soon. Keep an eye on that. I think I would imagine one of the reasons they're not using the apprenticeship requirement is for the single family housing would be really hard to meet.
This question goes to John Warner. How is solar ITC equity being priced relative to LIHTC equity?
That's a great question. So I'm going to talk about this in the context of a tax equity partnership deal. So the tax credit investors aren't just receiving the benefit of the credits; they're also receiving the tax depreciation benefits. And there are differences between the ITC and LIHTC in terms of when tax credit and depreciation benefits are realized by the investor, and that impacts what the investors are willing to pay for the credits. For LIHTC, the investor receives the benefit of the tax credits over a 10-year period, and the tax depreciation benefits typically over 27 and a half years. For ITCs, the investor receives all of the benefit of the tax credits in the year that the project is placed in service, and through the end of calendar year 2025, all of the depreciation benefits can also be realized in the first year because of the 100% bonus depreciation. After 2025, it's going to revert to the standard 5-year MACRS schedule, so it would be spread out over 6 years. So from a tax credit investor's perspective, the benefit of ITCs are front-loaded relative to LIHTC, and therefore the investor is typically willing to pay more for ITCs than they are for LIHTCs. I'd say typically around 200 to 400 basis points above what they're paying for the LIHTC investment. So on a recent deal where the LIHTC equity was priced at 84 cents per credit, the ITCs were priced at 86 cents per credit. So that's about 200 basis points up and higher yield for the ITCs. So they're more valuable because the benefits of them are realized by the investors sooner.
This is a question that I hadn't prepared with John before, John Stevenson, but I think he knows the answer to this question. So I'll lead it up with an easy one. So we have an existing building and you're doing very little upgrades to it. You're going to use your Energy Star portfolio manager as the applicable piece. Do you think that's going to apply or qualify for 45L?
Let's see here. I believe that's a no, and I think that's on one of the last 2 slides. If we want to backtrack to that. Let's see here. Because the answer is embedded. Look at that. So, let's see here. Yeah, the Energy Star portfolio manager. I don't know. Do you want to take this one?
I can take this one. Did I just? This is a question that we've been asked a lot by project teams, and I pardon you setting you up on this front. So the answer is no. You can't apply Energy Star portfolio manager. We had a lot of projects that asked us on projects that were just at TCO. We want to apply for the 45L tax credits, and unfortunately, it's for the multifamily new construction program. So we have to do that program all the way through. So if you're doing a kind of massive retrofit where you're going down to the studs and you're cutting in, kind of like what we had to do on Francis Clare, where there's a big uptick in cost, then you could probably get there, but there's a lot of things on the shell that you have to retrofit. And so this program is really applied to new construction and things where you're getting involved early on in the projects. Just be mindful of that as you're pursuing those types of tax credits. You be mindful of that piece. Any other questions for the audience? I've got a couple other things to kind of wrap this up, get you out to your other sessions today. Once, going twice. Okay. All right. Let me speed through this here. Hopefully that doesn't distract your eyes. Pardon the progression. Okay, so a couple takeaways here from kind of the nuance of what we are. So we talked about how the Inflation Reduction Act is really a transformative opportunity for us. And we should be not kind of, even though there's a lot of things involved, there's a lot of complexity, we're all learning together. This is an opportunity that we need to take advantage of now. And if you don't know about it, both the panelists up here and there's other members here in the audience that we're working with and other parties that have been researching this, there's a lot of opportunity for you and your projects that can help you progress to what you're trying to achieve, both in terms of the developments, the housing, workforce, and other kind of initiatives that we're trying to make happen sooner than later. So please jump in full force. Start early, work collaboratively, take advantage of these stackable bonuses. We have to take advantage of it now. Otherwise, that money will be unused, which we don't want to do that. And then there are some things that we can review in terms of these guidelines for the ITC and 45L. We have there's a lot of material here today that we've covered, a lot of great content. So some of that information is captured in these handouts for you. Got 3 different handouts to provide some resources for you to be able to refer back to. And then just for extra, because we didn't cover all of the different things, those different revenues or avenues that you could do stuff. So there are some other stuff that's coming out right now, like HERA. Some of you may know about these. There's up to $14,000 that can be used for upgrades on property. There's the homes. That's a $4.3 billion initiative that also is working on bringing upgrades. I know there's a lot of content on this material, so you can write some of that stuff down, maybe get access to this presentation also and have that content available to you. There's also the 25C, 25D tax credits. And then for some of you that don't have impacts with, say, certain LIHTC fundings, because this does impact basis, there's 179D as well. And that can be used both on existing and new construction projects. So we wanted to thank you for your attention today. It really does require all of our collaborative efforts to make this possible. Appreciate your attention. And if you're wondering why you're maybe getting a little bit sleepy right now, it's not because of the content we've been covering. The air quality in here has spiked in CO2 levels above. I've been monitoring it during this presentation. So as we get outside, you'll get a little bit of breath of air. And we'll get started again. So thank you again for your attention.